Hey, my name is Daniel Winslet, and I'll be presenting to you my brochure on obsessive-compulsive disorder. So just to give a quick overview about obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD, it is a psychological disorder, or chronic anxiety disorder. It involves the repeated occurrence of obsessions and or compulsions, and it is characterized by excessive orderliness, perfectionism, attention to detail, and a need for control in relating to others. So people with OCD are really over the top about just about everything. So just to give a quick history about it, people have dealt with OCD since like the beginning when people were around. However, early historical descriptions of OCD do exist with some clear, detailed likely cases dating back to the 14th century. One of the first public presentations of what we now call OCD happened in 1691 when John Moore, the Bishop of Norwich, preached before Queen Mary II on religious melancholy. He preached about good moral worshippers who are tormented by naughty and sometimes blasphemous thoughts, despite all their efforts to stifle and ignore them, so they could do nothing about the thoughts that they had. And he describes the scrupulous, or the people with OCD, as having a fear that what they do is so defective and unfit to be presented to God. So this was the beginning of how the name OCD came into place. So moving on to prevalence rates and groups affected. Approximately 2.3% of the population has OCD. That is, in fact, 1 in 40 adults and 1 in 100 children in the United States. The prevalence of OCD in a 12-month period is higher in females than in males. For females, it's 1.8%, and in males, it's 0.5%. So another interesting fact is that families that have a history of OCD, there is a 25% chance that another immediate family member will develop symptoms. So that's another important thing to know. And then talking about groups affected by OCD, it affects adults, adolescents, and children all over the world, so many age groups. But most people are diagnosed around the age of 19. And typically there is an earlier age of onset in boys than in girls, but onset after age 35 does happen. So moving on to causes. So when talking about OCD, there's a combination of different factors that play a part. There's genetic factors, environmental factors, and neurobiological risk factors that may cause it. We don't know an exact cause, but research does suggest that symptoms of OCD are linked with communication areas among the brain and the genes. So we do know that there are abnormalities in neurotransmitter systems. And another important thing to know is that people with OCD do not have serotonin readily available in parts of the brain for important communications to take place. There are abnormalities in chemicals such as dopamine, glutamate, and serotonin, because these chemicals are involved in sending messages between brain cells. Now moving on to symptoms. So there are two different types of symptoms of OCD, including obsession symptoms and compulsion symptoms. Different obsession symptoms include fear of contamination of dirt, doubting or having difficulty tolerating uncertainty, needing things orderly and symmetrical at all times, aggressive or horrific thoughts about losing control and harming yourself, or unwanted thoughts, and just other things like that, including aggression or sexual or religious subjects. Compulsion symptoms may include washing, cleaning, checking things repeatedly over and over and over, counting, having to be orderly all the time, following a strict routine, or demanding reassurance. So now moving on to related disorders. So there are 4 disorders that I researched on that related to OCD. So one of them was hoarding disorder. And the relation between that and OCD was that they both spend a lifetime collecting and rearranging items. And another one was called body dysmorphic disorder. And both that and OCD do repetitive checking. Another disorder, known as body focuses repetitive behaviors, or BFRBS, and those both do repetitive behaviors uncontrollably. And finally, the last disorder that related to OCD was olfactory reference syndrome. And both of these have obsessions that cause them a lot of distress, and they both perform repetitive behaviors as well. So now moving on to treatment options for OCD. There are different therapy options that you can choose. Cognitive behavioral therapy, which is when negative patterns about the self and the world are challenged in order to alter unwanted behavior. There is aversion therapy, which is a type of behavioral therapy that involves the repeated pairing of unwanted behavior with discomfort. There is also group psychotherapy, which involves one or more mental health practitioners who deliver psychotherapy to several individuals in each section. Then we have exposure and response prevention, which is therapy that encourages you to face your fears and let obsessive thoughts occur without you neutralizing them with compulsions. Finally, we have rational emotive behavior therapy, or REBT. And this is a type of therapy introduced by Albert Ellis in the 1950s, and it's an approach that helps you identify irrational beliefs and negative thought patterns that may lead to emotional or behavioral issues. Now moving on to different medication options. We have various SSRIs such as sertraline, fluoxetine, fluvoxamine, or paroxetine. We have anxiolytic to relieve stress, or we have various antidepressants such as clomipramine, fluoxetine, fluvoxamine, or paroxetine. So there's different drugs and medications that can help treat your OCD. So now moving on to the OCD case study. And I found this case study online. I thought it was really interesting, and it really explained how OCD can have a toll on your life. So Lisa is a 32-year-old Caucasian bank teller, and then her job requires her to interact with customers on a daily basis. And her work involves processing routine bank transactions, including cashing checks and depositing, exchanging money. And then Lisa is constantly fearful of coming into contact with anything that might be contaminated. So she's worried about bacteria with the money and all that kind of stuff. So she hurries to the bathroom to wash her hands after every teller transaction. Well, as a result, this is causing her to be behind in her job because she's really convinced that this bacteria on her hands will cause an illness. And she's so over the top about it that she can't get over the thought that she's going to get contaminated with bacteria. So she spends up to 10 minutes each time she's in the bathroom. And as you can see, this has caused delays in getting her work done. So despite spending a significant part of her day washing and using hand sanitizer, Lisa is still constantly doubtful about her cleanliness. So it don't matter how many times she goes to the restroom or how many times she's touched money, she still has that thought in the back of her head that she's going to get contaminated with this bacteria and she's going to get sick. I really like this case study because it really emphasizes and shows how much of an impact OCD has on someone's life when they can't do nothing about it either. And then on the middle section of the trifold, I include a couple pictures. So the color pencil shows how orderliness someone with OCD would be, trying to have all the colors lined up. And then at the bottom, if you look, I put a picture of a healthy brain right beside a picture of a brain with OCD. And I thought this was really interesting because OCD heavily affects the prefrontal cortex, basal ganglia, and the thalamus of the brain. So I thought that was a really interesting picture to put in there. And then on the right is my works cited. And that concludes my presentation. I hope y'all enjoyed.